A dry, sharp scream tore through the air inside Terminal B, slicing open an atmosphere already stretched tight as wire. 2 airline employees stumbled out of the way as the operation screen in front of them flashed an urgent red, pulsing like a heart about to fail. And in the middle of that chaos, Ethan Caldwell stood perfectly still, his deep, steady eyes watching the scene unfold, like a man who had known all along this moment would come. In his hand, the phone screen still glowed with a short message. Ground Flight 408 immediately. No exclamation mark, no explanation, just 4 words heavy enough to make the entire North Sky Airlines system jolt to a halt like a machine beast choking on its own breath. None of the young employees had any idea who the man was. To them, he was just another irritated traveler, probably upset about a delayed departure. They had no clue that a single tap of his finger could leave a jet sitting idle on the runway like a useless metal carcass. No clue that he held 25% of the parent company shares and had the authority to issue a command capable of sending their stock price crashing like shattered glass. All they knew was that they had no idea what had just happened. But to understand why a calm, steady CEO like Ethan would order an entire flight grounded, we have to go back 30 minutes earlier to the moment it all began. Seattle-Tacoma Airport was unusually crowded that morning. Cold winds drifting in from Elliott Bay swirled around the terminal, slipping through the glass joints and carrying the scent of sea salt and the damp Pacific Northwest air. People pressed through security lines, rolling suitcases, clattering like pounding drums, pushing everything forward. Moving through that turbulence, Ethan walked with the quiet certainty of a man used to making decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His long black coat, precisely tailored gray suit, and lightly polished leather shoes all gave off the sharp, minimal elegance of someone who refused to let a single unnecessary detail exist around him. But what people remembered about Ethan was never his clothes. It was his presence. No showiness, no theatrics, yet everyone instinctively straightened their posture when he stood near. In the tech world, they called him the Quiet Storm, the executive who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. Today he was flying to Denver, where a $600 million deal at Caldwell Cyber Systems waited for his signature, a deal poised to push the company into absolute dominance in cybersecurity. But before technology, before strategy, Ethan had to face something older than any outdated system prejudice. The trouble started the moment he entered security. "Sir, step aside. Please, random screening." The TSA officer's voice carried no malice, no rudeness, only a mechanical indifference. Ethan glanced at the line ahead of him. A middle-aged couple, 3 white teenagers in hoodies, a young businessman with a silver Rimowa case. None of them were pulled aside. Only him. He did not react. Not because he was used to enduring it, but because he knew anger would only cost him more time, and time was the one thing he didn't have today. Another officer rummaged through his suitcase. A second swabbed his laptop for explosives. A third inspected his shoes. A fourth ran a detection wand down his arms as if he were hiding a weapon under his suit. Ethan stood still, his eyes cold as a winter ocean. But beneath that calm old memories stirred the times he had been followed through luxury stores as a young man, the suspicious looks in 5-star hotels, the repeated questions, "Are you sure you are in the right place?" He thought he had grown past that feeling. He had not. After nearly 20 minutes of random screening, Ethan was finally allowed to continue. His phone vibrated repeatedly with messages from Marcus Hill, his chief financial officer. "Founders next gate getting cold feet. Where are you?" Ethan did not respond yet. His pace quickened, as if trying to outrun the heavy air clinging to him. Gate B11 waited at the end of the concourse. He had exactly 6 minutes left before boarding, but the moment he arrived, he knew this would not be simple. At the counter, Lauren Briggs, a neatly groomed blonde gate agent, greeted an older white passenger with a beaming smile, glancing at his boarding pass for barely a second before waving him through. But when Ethan stepped forward, that smile vanished, as if someone had turned off a switch. "First class?" she asked, her voice thick with doubt. Ethan nodded. "Yes." Lauren stared at her screen like she hoped the computer would confirm her suspicion. "Sir, I need to see your identification." Ethan handed her his driver's license. She held it longer than necessary, studying every detail of his face, as if she were determined to find something out of place. "I did not see you ask anyone else for identification," he said calmly. Lauren stiffened, a faint flush rising on her cheeks. "We are just following procedure." People in line began whispering, irritated sighs. "A soft someone here actually has a flight to catch." Kelsey, another agent, walked over. "Is there a problem?" Lauren lowered her voice just enough for Ethan to hear. "He claims he has a first-class seat." Ethan lifted his phone and held the boarding pass up to their faces. "Seat 1A, issued by your airline." "You may check anything you like." Kelsey typed aggressively, her brows knitting together. Then she exhaled. "No issue. He does have the seat." No apology. No change in attitude, just a stiff confirmation and a barely polite nod to move along. Ethan stepped into the jetway, releasing a slow, heavy breath as if he had been carrying the whole terminal on his back. He felt tired. Not from travel. From this. From the reality that no amount of success, wealth, or Forbes features could erase the color of his skin. Achievement could not rewrite perception. When Ethan stepped into the first-class cabin, silence gave way to something sharper mockery. His seat was occupied. A man in his early 60s, silver hair, expensive suit, typing on a leather-bound tablet. Franklin Rhodes, a well-known financial consultant in the Northwest investment circle. Ethan approached. "Excuse me, that is my seat." Franklin glanced at him for half a second, did not move, did not acknowledge politely, did not respect him. "I sit here," he replied like he was dismissing a waiter. Ethan held up his boarding pass. 1A. "This is mine." Franklin smirked. "Are you sure? This seat is for priority members. I sit here every month." From behind, a flight attendant approached Mark Dalton. "What seems to be the issue?" Franklin answered before Ethan could. "He is confused about his seat." Mark turned to Ethan, skepticism creeping into his expression, as if Ethan's presence in first class made no sense. "Are you sure you read your ticket correctly, sir?" Ethan raised the boarding pass again. 1A. "I believe it is very clear." Mark glanced at it briefly, then immediately turned back to Franklin with an oddly submissive tone. "I will check with the gate." He walked away. Ethan stood in the aisle, an obstacle blocking the growing line of impatient passengers. Phones were raised. A few people filmed. Some stared at him with pity. Some avoided meeting his gaze like they were witnessing a car crash. They felt guilty watching. Ethan kept his posture straight, but the familiar feeling tightening in his throat was unmistakable. The feeling of being seen as someone who did not belong in the place he had worked his entire life to earn. Mark returned with the lead flight attendant, Sandra Lowe. She looked at Franklin, then at Ethan, but her posture tilted unmistakably in favor of the relaxed white man, comfortably sitting where Ethan should be. "Sir, we need you to move to seat 3C so we can avoid delays." 3C is in premium economy, Ethan replied. Sandra pressed her lips together. "It is still a good seat. We will offer you a voucher." Ethan met her eyes. "I do not need a voucher. I need what I paid for." The air went thick. Sandra began losing patience. "You are obstructing the boarding process." Ethan's voice remained calm, every word falling heavy onto the aircraft floor. "I am asking for what is mine." And then Captain Victor Hale appeared, and in that moment, the instant his eyes scanned Ethan with a single evaluative glance, everything was decided. But that part belongs later in the story. For now, as Ethan stood there, under the bright cabin lights, surrounded by suspicious stares, dismissive looks, and silent judgments, he understood one thing today would not be the day he kept quiet. And everything that had just happened was only the opening act before the storm. The airplane door shut with a sharp click, a cold sound that echoed like an invisible verdict. The passengers settled in. First class turned their heads, their eyes a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Ethan Caldwell remained standing tall and composed, yet inside him a storm was gathering. In front of him, Captain Victor Hale stood with arms crossed, his expression harder than steel. It was not the look of someone trying to understand a situation. It was the look of a man who had already chosen a side long before checking the facts. Sir Hale said, his voice flat and emotionless, "We need to depart. I am asking you one last time, take another seat." In that instant, Ethan saw what he had seen in hundreds of people throughout his life. Prejudice does not need time to form it, only needs a single glance. He replied with a soft but cutting voice, "I paid for seat 1A. The man sitting there is not the rightful owner of that seat. All you have to do is check his boarding pass." Silence hung for exactly 3 seconds. Then Franklin Rhodes, the man occupying his seat, spoke with the arrogance of someone used to obedience. "Captain, this is ridiculous. I always sit in 1A. He must be confused. Confused." The word hit Ethan like an icy slap, not because it insulted him, but because it was familiar, old, exhausting. Sandra Lowe, the lead flight attendant, stepped in with a gentle voice laced with criticism. "Sir, please do not escalate this. Other passengers are waiting." Ethan turned to her, a look that stopped her for half a beat. "Escalate," he said slowly. "You are saying I am causing trouble because I want to sit in the seat that belongs to me." Some passengers held their breath. Others lowered their eyes, unwilling to be part of the scene. But a few especially, an Asian American woman in seat 2. Dee watched Ethan with knowing eyes, as if she understood exactly the position he was being pushed into. Captain Hale shook his head. "Sir, I am not debating this. If you refuse to comply, I will have to remove you under FAA regulations." Ethan felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from the blatant absurdity unfolding in front of him. He looked around the cabin at every face, every stare, every phone subtly raised to record. Then he spoke his deep voice, carrying all the way to the back of the cabin. "If you want to follow procedure, check his boarding pass. That is all. One simple step." Hale did not look at Franklin. He did not look at the screen. He did not check the ticket. He only looked at Ethan and made his decision. "Security," his voice rang loud enough for the entire plane to hear, "remove this passenger." A wave of whispers rippled through the cabin like fire racing through dry grass. What he paid for the seat. This is wrong. Oh my God, they are really kicking him out. But no one stood up. No one confronted the captain. No one wanted to become the next problem passenger. 2 security officers entered, faces stern, but their eyes showed a flicker of confusion, as if they too sensed that something about this was wrong. "Sir, please come with us," one of them said. Ethan looked at Captain Hale, at Sandra, at Franklin. Then he looked at seat 1A, the seat he had purchased like any other customer, an ordinary seat that had become a symbol in a battle he never asked for, but would not walk away from. He inhaled deeply, stood taller, and the heaviness in his chest sharpened into clarity. This was not about a seat. This was about dignity. And today he would not step back. "Fine," Ethan said. But there was no defeat in his voice. It was a warning. He took out his phone, pressed record, slid it into his jacket with the microphone uncovered. Then he turned to the passengers watching him. "I want all of you to note this clearly," he said, his voice precise and unwavering. "I am being removed for asking to sit in the seat I paid for. Meanwhile, the white gentleman who took my seat is being allowed to stay." A tense wave spread across the cabin. Mark Dalton lowered his head. Sandra paled. Franklin shifted uneasily, avoiding every eye. The officers placed a hand on Ethan's arm, gentle but firm, not wishing to escalate further. Ethan walked, no bowed head, no trembling. Nothing but resolve. And as he stepped through the airplane door, someone whispered just loud enough for him to hear. "He is someone important. I think they just messed with the wrong guy." The plot twist had begun forming. They just did not know how deep it ran. When Ethan was escorted into the terminal, he was led to a quiet corner under cold LED lights. A familiar loneliness settled onto his shoulders, the kind he had learned to live with since childhood, when a store refused him entry because they were not sure he could afford anything inside. The loneliness of someone who knows he is right but is held back again and again by a system unwilling to see his worth. His phone buzzed. A social media notification appeared. New video: black man kicked off first-class seat for asking to prove it is his. More than 3,000 views in just 12 minutes. Another video went up, then another. Comments rolled in. "This looks like discrimination. Where is the accountability? Someone call the airline. CEO, he handled it so calmly. Respect." Ethan stared at the screen, a bitter yet powerful emotion rising inside him. Now they saw it. Now no one could tell him he was being too sensitive. Now no one could hide what had happened. He exhaled, then opened his contacts. There was only one name he needed to call. Marcus Hill, 48, Chief Financial Officer. The man who always said, "Ethan, if you do not push back, they will never understand consequences." The phone rang once. Marcus answered immediately. "Ethan, what happened?" Ethan did not let him finish. He recounted everything, his voice calm to the point of coldness, but Marcus could hear the fire beneath each word. When Ethan finished, Marcus was silent for 3 seconds. Then he spoke in a tone Ethan had rarely heard. "Ethan, they just kicked one of the largest shareholders of their parent company off a plane." Ethan did not respond yet. He looked toward the glass window, where Flight 408 still sat, lights glowing faintly. Marcus continued, "Do you remember last quarter's restructuring? We bought the old stake from Orion Holdings. Ethan Orion is the parent company of North Sky Airlines." A dangerous silence dropped between them. Ethan lowered his voice. "Marcus, be clear. You currently hold 25% of Orion Holdings. North Sky Airlines belongs to Orion. Ethan, you are practically co-owner of the airline that just humiliated you." Ethan closed his eyes. His heart beat, slow, heavy like distant drums. Marcus delivered the final line. "Ethan, they threw out the wrong man." Ethan opened his eyes, the world sharpening into perfect focus. He spoke slowly, each word weighted like a sentence handed down from a judge. "Call an emergency meeting. And Marcus, I am here. Send this message to the CEO of North Sky." He stared at the aircraft beyond the glass. "Ground Flight 408, immediately." Marcus did not ask why, did not request details, did not hesitate. He simply said, "Done." Ethan watched the crew, the passengers, the movement around the aircraft, unaware that the flight would not be taking off. They did not know that the closed door of that Boeing had locked the fate of everyone involved. They did not know that the man they dismissed was the man who held the company's future in his hand. And as the airport system began announcing the grounding order, as employees rushed in panic, as passengers rose in confusion, Ethan felt something unexpected. Peace. Not the peace of revenge, the peace of justice finally switching on. Behind him, Lauren, the gate agent who had doubted him earlier, ran toward her supervisor, her face drained of color. "Supervisor, we just got grounded. They said the order came from North Sky headquarters." The supervisor frowned. "Which headquarters?" "From the highest floor." Some employees exchanged looks. Someone whispered, "Only the new CEO would do that. Nobody else has that authority." Lauren turned her eyes instinctively, searching for Ethan, who still stood there, silent, the calm center of a storm, pulling everything into alignment around him. And in that second, she understood. He was not just a regular passenger, not someone they could casually question, not someone they could throw off a plane. She wondered, what mistake did we just make? But the answer, like the coming storm, was no longer far away. The airport speakers echoed through the terminal like the alarm call of a giant creature waking from its sleep. "Attention, all passengers of Flight 408 to Denver. This flight has been grounded indefinitely. Please await further instructions." The uproar exploded instantly. A crowd of passengers pressed together, furious, confused, holding up phones to record the chaos. The glass walls reflected the scene like a distorted mirror of the truth, a truth in which outrage spread faster than any storm. At the center of it all, Ethan Caldwell stood still, calm as a lone pillar in turbulent seas. No one knew who he was. No one understood why he was so composed. They only sensed something subtle but unmistakable, that all of this chaos seemed to radiate outward from him. And they felt by instinct that he was not an ordinary man. Across the terminal inside the operations room, North Sky Airlines' system monitors blinked furiously with errors, warnings, and urgent confirmation prompts. A young operations agent gasped, "Oh my God, the grounding order was sent from an Orion Holdings executive access account." Another turned sharply. "That is the highest authorization tier. Who even has permission to use that account?" No one answered. But the silence of people beginning to realize they had stepped on a dragon's tail, thickened the air. Lauren Briggs's supervisor rushed into the command area, face drained of all color. "Do not tell me this has to do with the passenger you too had trouble with earlier." Lauren gripped her clipboard tightly. "I do not know. But there is something very different about him." Different, the supervisor barked, different enough to make all of Orion shut down a flight. "Lauren, speak clearly." Lauren swallowed hard. This was no longer about identification or boarding passes. This was about a mistake so large she could feel it crushing everyone involved. Meanwhile, outside in the terminal, a few passengers approached Ethan, not to blame him, but to support him. A middle-aged white woman stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "Sir, I saw everything. You are not wrong. They treated you terribly." An Asian young man added, "I recorded the whole thing from the start. If you need evidence, I have it." A black man nearby placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "They have done this to us our whole lives, but this time looks like they picked the wrong man." Ethan only nodded, his eyes free of anger, filled instead with a cold clarity of someone who understood that the wave rising behind him was not to drown him, but to follow him. Marcus Hill called back. His voice was low and firm like a delivered verdict. "Ethan, the Orion Holdings board is in emergency session. North Sky's CEO, Richard Donovan, is panicking. They want to speak with you immediately." Ethan looked through the glass at the runway, where Flight 408 sat motionless, like a steel bird with its wings clipped. "When will Donovan arrive?" he asked. "They are preparing a private jet. From Chicago to Seattle is about 3 hours. 3 hours. Ethan repeated it slowly, as if weighing every second falling into place. "Marcus, make sure every report on the crew's behavior is submitted to the board, and send Donovan this message." Marcus waited. Ethan continued. "The conversation will take place in front of everyone. No closed doors, no filters. You want to confront them publicly." "Not confront," Ethan said softly, transparent. Marcus exhaled, then let out a tired, half-amused laugh. "Ethan, I told you. They had no idea who they were dealing with." Back in the terminal, North Sky managers were trying to calm the passengers. A frustrated man shouted, "Why are we grounded? I have a meeting at 3 o'clock. A woman holding her child cried, "We have waited all morning." "What is this nonsense?" The supervisor tried to remain steady. "We apologize. This is a directive from the highest executive level. Please remain calm." But calm was no longer possible. People began connecting the dots. The only clue was the moment Ethan was forced off the plane. A passenger called out, "I saw the video. They treated that man like garbage. They threw out the wrong person." A child tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mommy, why does that man look like he is not scared of anything?" the mother whispered. "Because sometimes the strongest people are the ones who do not need to shout." As for Ethan, he sat down on an empty seat near the glass wall. He spoke no words, made no dramatic motion, did not pretend to be strong. He simply breathed, one long breath, heavy as the past he had carried his whole life. In that breath, memories brushed against him. Young Ethan being called to the principal's office for suspicious behavior, even though he had only been reading in the hallway. 17-year-old Ethan stopped by store security and forced to open his backpack in front of friends. 24-year-old Ethan walking into a multi-million-dollar investment office only to be asked, "Do you have an appointment?" while white men arriving after him were escorted straight into the boardroom. 40-year-old Ethan, even as a CEO, asked by a hotel staff member to verify his identity again because he did not look like the person in their system. He had endured. He had tolerated. He had risen. He had succeeded. But today, they crossed the final line. Not because of the seat, not because of the insults, but because they believed they could do it without consequence. They believed he was just another powerless man with no voice and no recourse. They believed he was the perfect target. They were wrong, Ethan whispered. At that moment, he overheard a conversation between Lauren and Kelsey nearby. "Who do you think he is?" Kelsey asked in a low tone, as if afraid Ethan could hear. "I do not know," Lauren replied, her eyes still fixed on Ethan's silhouette, "but I feel like he could tear this airline apart if he wanted." "For a boarding issue," Kelsey shivered. "Not just boarding," Lauren said, her voice cracking, "but because we treated him like he did not belong in first class." Kelsey fell silent. Lauren continued, "I thought he was just another businessman." But his eyes, "I have never seen a normal person look like that." Then she added softly, trembling, "I think we judged someone we should have bowed to." Time passed. 1 hour, then 2. News articles began appearing online. Passenger removed from flight after demanding the seat he paid for flight, grounded minutes later. Comment racial profiling again. Comment North Sky Airlines owes him an apology. Comment that man looks important. Hope the airline has lawyers ready. Ethan scrolled through the headlines without a change in expression. He did not need public anger. He did not need a hollow apology. He wanted something greater, cleaner, lasting. He wanted change. Then the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. A North Sky manager rushed into the gate area, clutching a radio and a phone, his face drenched in sweat. "They are here. Donovan is here." The buzz erupted again. Everyone turned toward security checkpoint number 3, and moments later, a group of executives in tailored suits stepped inside. They moved quickly, tension tight in their posture, fear etched across their features like people arriving to put out a fire that could speak for itself. Leading them was Richard Donovan, CEO of North Sky Airlines. Behind him were the Vice President of Human Resources, the Chief Legal Officer, and the Head of Public Relations. They approached as though walking into a courtroom, and the man sitting calmly in front of them was the judge they had unknowingly provoked. When Donovan saw Ethan, he froze for half a second. Not because he recognized him, but because he felt the force of authority radiating from a man sitting quietly in the center of a storm created by his own company. The executives parted. Donovan stepped forward alone. He spoke first. "Mr. Caldwell, I am Richard Donovan, CEO of North Sky Airlines." Ethan looked at him. He did not stand. He did not extend his hand. He offered only a cold, steady gaze. Donovan swallowed. "I am here to apologize." Ethan did not answer immediately. He let the silence stretch. Let everyone witness it. Let the air tighten into judgment. Then, with a calm voice, sharp as a thin blade, he said, "Stand before everyone and explain why you removed a valid passenger from your flight." The crowd fell into absolute stillness. Donovan understood. This conversation would happen here. No conference room, no frosted glass, no PR team clearing the path. Only truth and the eyes of hundreds waiting to hear it. Donovan nodded slowly. And in that moment, he knew a new era was beginning, one in which there would be no room for the disregard his airline had just shown. Richard Donovan stood before Ethan Caldwell, like a man pushed to the edge of a cliff. His eyes flickered, not out of fear of another human being, but because he understood that this man could do far more than ground a single flight. He knew Ethan had the power to tear open the floor beneath North Sky Airlines and drop the entire company into free fall. The terminal fell silent. No rolling suitcases. No crying children. Even the overhead speakers seemed to choke on the air. Only 2 men remained at the center of the storm, one representing the system that ruled the skies, and the other representing generations of people that system had pushed out of the sky. Ethan lifted his gaze, his voice soft but sharp as a blade. You said you wanted to apologize to me, correct? Then apologize. Here, in front of everyone. Donovan swallowed. Behind him, his executives exchanged uneasy glances. They had never seen their CEO cornered into bowing his honor before a passenger, but they had also never seen social media erupt at the speed it was erupting now. They knew Ethan had power. They still did not know how much. Donovan drew a deep breath, then turned to the crowd, his voice trembling slightly but firm. I apologize for how our airline treated Mr. Caldwell this morning. What happened was completely wrong, and I take full responsibility. A wave of murmurs burst across the terminal. He actually apologized. Finally, someone does the right thing. This airline is finished. But Ethan's face remained unmoved. He tilted his head, then spoke a sentence that drained the color from Donovan's face. That is the apology you give the press. I want the apology with the reason. Donovan blinked, thrown off. Ethan's eyes sharpened like a needle-piercing armor. Explain why your flight forced me off the plane, while the man who stole my seat was allowed to stay. A woman holding her child let out a heavy sigh. A man nearby shook his head, ashamed, even though he had played no part. Donovan looked around, then back at Ethan, and realized he could not escape. He spoke, his voice dropping. My crew misjudged the situation. They were biased. They brought their prejudices into their decision. Ethan cut him off. What prejudice? Donovan froze. You cannot say it. Ethan asked, his tone quiet enough to freeze blood. Donovan looked down, then up. And for the first time in his career, he said aloud, a truth every airline fought desperately to bury. Racial bias. A blade of cold air sliced through the terminal. A woman whispered, so they finally admitted it. A white passenger covered her mouth, stunned. I cannot believe this still happens today. Ethan did not smile. He did not nod. He did not revel in victory, because he knew confession was not victory. Change was. He folded his arms, his voice dropping to a chilling calm. An apology is not enough. You know that, right? Donovan nodded, quickly stripped of his usual confidence. I know, and we are prepared to do whatever is necessary to fix this. You do not understand, Ethan replied, cutting him off like a blade through silk. I do not want promises. I do not want corporate statements. I do not want cheap vouchers or a few meaningless training sessions. Ethan rose to his feet. In that moment, every gaze locked on him. Not because he was the victim, but because he rose like the arbiter of fate, the one who would decide whether North Sky deserved to fly again. Ethan spoke. I want systemic change. I want reform. I want to ensure what happened today never happens to anyone else, regardless of who they are, what they wear, or where they come from. Donovan stammered, I understand. And we will work with you. To Ethan raised a hand. We are not in the meeting yet. I have not agreed to come to the table. Donovan stopped mid-sentence, confused. Then Ethan delivered the sentence that froze the entire North Sky leadership in place. I will only speak with you after you bring the crew responsible for this incident here, right now. The air turned to ice. Donovan's eyes widened. You want to meet them? Here. Ethan nodded slowly. Within 10 minutes. If they do not show up, I will walk out of this airport, and I assure you, North Sky will no longer be permitted to operate a single aircraft this week. Donovan's expression shattered like glass. The consequences of that threat were catastrophic beyond imagination. He spun toward his team. Bring them here. Now. Minutes later, the crew appeared. Mark Dalton entered first, with a face pale as chalk, like someone dragged out of an interrogation room. Sandra Lowe followed, trying to maintain her composure, though her trembling hands betrayed her. Finally, Captain Victor Hale arrived, still walking briskly with a straight spine, but the fire of authority in his eyes had been extinguished. They stopped before Ethan. None dared speak. Ethan looked at each of them, not to shame them, but to force them to feel the unseen weight of the choices they had thought were small. He began with Captain Hale. You, the one with full authority on board. Can you explain why you refused to check the boarding pass of the man occupying my seat? Hale opened his mouth, but no justification emerged. Sandra Lowe stepped in, her voice thin. We believed Mr. Rhodes was a regular passenger. He often sits. Ethan cut her off. Often. That is a legal reason to steal someone else's seat. Sandra fell silent. Ethan turned to Mark Dalton. And you the first to confront me. You told me I read my ticket wrong. Why? Mark lowered his head. I thought Ethan repeated, eyes fixed on him. Thought because my suit was simple. Thought because I did not look first class. Or thought because I did not look like the people you are used to seeing in seat 1A. Mark's face flushed with shame. Ethan lowered his voice, but it struck deeper than anything before. A person with prejudice can hurt someone, but a person with prejudice inside a system with power can destroy lives. No one argued. No one dared. Then Ethan exhaled for the first time, revealing a hint of his exhaustion. You did not know who I was. That does not matter. What matters is that you treated me as if I did not deserve respect. He turned to Donovan, who stood frozen between humiliation and dread. I will go into the meeting with you, but not because I am angry, because I want this system to change for real. From the roots. Not to save your reputation, but to protect the nameless passengers with no power, the ones unlike me. Are you ready to listen? Donovan nodded so hard his neck strained. Yes. Completely yes. Ethan nodded back. Good. Then we will meet. Now. He turned away. At that moment, a little girl in the crowd tugged her mother's sleeve. Mommy, is he a superhero? The mother watched Ethan's silhouette as he walked. No, sweetheart. But sometimes the courage of a good man is stronger than any superhero. Ethan did not hear it, but he felt it. Because today, he was not standing up for himself. He was standing up for everyone who had ever been pushed out of the seat they rightfully earned. The temporary meeting room door swung open, spilling cold white light across the floor in a sharp blade-like arc. When Ethan Caldwell stepped inside, the entire space seemed to shrink, not because it was small, but because his presence carried its own gravity. Everyone in that room, Richard Donovan, Monica Reyes, Samuel Pierce, and the 3 PR advisors shot to their feet, as if an unseen force had yanked them upright. No one had told them to stand yet. Every single one did. Instinct told them they were standing before the man who held the fate of the entire airline, a man whose nod could save them, and whose refusal could reduce their careers to ashes. Ethan sat at the head of the table without waiting for an invitation. Richard Donovan, the CEO of North Sky, lowered himself into the chair across from him. His eyes hollow, like a man who had lost direction after a storm. Mr. Caldwell, first allow me. A subtle lift of Ethan's hand silenced Donovan instantly. Not out of fear, but because the authority radiating from Ethan made it clear he alone held the right to speak first. Ethan placed his phone on the table. The screen lit up. 87.3 thousand people were watching the live stream about the incident, a number cold enough to send shivers through any corporation. "Let us get straight to the point," Ethan began, his voice calm and slow, yet heavy as a hammer. "What happened this morning was not an accident, not a misunderstanding. It was the result of a culture built on bias, run by people who believe they are always right, and that customers like me are just faceless names." The tension in the room tightened. Monica Reyes, the chief legal officer, attempted to regain composure, though her voice trembled slightly. "Mr. Caldwell, if you could elaborate." Ethan tilted his head and looked at her, not with anger, but with a cold precision that made even a seasoned attorney fall silent. "I will elaborate. But first, I want to hear from North Sky's CEO himself. Mr. Donovan, if I had not intervened, how exactly were you planning to resolve this?" Donovan swallowed loudly enough for the entire room to feel it. He knew every word he said now would expose how North Sky leadership truly thought. "I would have suspended the crew," Donovan answered, staring down at the table, unable to meet Ethan's gaze. Then issued a public apology, and Ethan cut him off, his tone sharp enough to make Donovan flinch. I knew it. The same scripted apology every airline uses. But do you realize something? That reaction is part of the problem. Ethan surveyed every face in the room, his eyes seeing straight through them. North Sky did not have an incident this morning because someone misread a procedure. North Sky had an incident because you have sustained a culture that allows discrimination to exist without fear of consequence. Monica tried to interject but failed. Ethan did not need to raise his voice. Every word he spoke sliced into the pride of the executive seated at that table. Today it was me. Tomorrow, it will be another passenger. The next day, it will be an employee mistreated. And why? Because your decisions consistently ignore the humanity inside every person on your planes. Samuel Pierce, the Vice President of Human Resources, spoke in a frail voice. "Then what do you want us to do?" Ethan leaned back in his chair. In that moment, he was no longer the man kicked off a plane. He was the man rewriting the rules of the sky itself. "I will state my requirements," Ethan said, "and you will sign them. Not because I force you, but because I will not align myself with any system that does not value justice." The room held its breath. Ethan spoke each demand landing like a judge's gavel. "First, I want North Sky to create the position of Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer. That person reports directly to the CAO. No symbolic power, no figurehead." Donovan's eyes widened, realizing this requirement alone would reshape the company's leadership structure. Ethan continued without pause. "Second, mandatory anti-bias training every quarter. Not a 15-minute video. Real training. Third, a new complaint response system. Customers must receive a reply within 24 hours, an investigation within 72 hours, and a conclusion within 10 days. Fourth, North Sky leadership must reach at least 30% diversity within 18 months. A PR advisor whispered under her breath, "That is impossible." Ethan glanced at her for a single second, and she fell silent. Impossible, no. You simply never tried. Fifth, full public transparency every quarter on discrimination-related complaints. No deleting, no softening. Sixth, establish a scholarship fund for young people of color who want to pursue aviation. Not for publicity, for the future. Seventh, every crew member involved today will undergo an independent investigation with appropriate disciplinary action. Ethan paused. The room felt drained of oxygen. Donovan stared at him, voice cracking. You are asking us to rewrite the entire foundation of how this airline operates. Ethan replied, calm and terrifyingly steady. Yes, because that foundation is flawed. Donovan, nearly out of defenses, asked in desperation, "Why are you doing this? You could have accepted a simple apology." Compensation. And everything would quiet down. Ethan leaned forward, and a light appeared in his eyes that no one in the room would ever forget. Because I do not want a child to be forced out of a seat they paid for just because their skin does not match the person next to them. Because I am done staying silent. Because I have power, and I am tired of using it only for myself. He continued his words, echoing across the cold floor. If I do not stand up, who will? No one in the room could meet his gaze. And then something unexpected happened. Donovan nodded, not reluctantly, not defensively, but like a man who had just seen the truth. "We will sign, Donovan," said voice, trembling but sincere. "All of it." Ethan stood, picked up his phone and said quietly, "Good. Sign." Within minutes, documents were brought in, and one by one they signed. Each signature cut a deep line into the airline's history. When Donovan added the final signature, sweat dripped onto the page. Not sweat of fear, sweat of realization. Ethan walked toward the door. Donovan called out, "What will you tell the press?" Ethan turned his eyes deep and steady as the ocean floor. "The truth," he replied. "Justice is not revenge. Justice is change. And today, you have begun to change." He opened the door and stepped out, leaving behind a room full of people who had just learned a profound lesson. They had not encountered a disgruntled passenger. They had encountered a man who could bring the entire sky to a halt. The meeting room door closed behind Ethan Caldwell, leaving inside a group of people standing frozen, as if they had just witnessed an earthquake whose epicenter lay in their own chests. But outside at Gate B11, the real quake was only beginning. Passengers clustered in groups, staring at their phone screens, exchanging comments, debating, arguing. And in every video recorded, all eyes followed one figure, a black man walking out of the meeting room with a calmness so absolute it seemed he had just done the simplest thing in the world, demanded justice. Ethan walked slowly, but each step seemed to press against the airport floor with the weight of an entire system overdue for change. He said nothing yet. His presence alone caused the entire concourse to fall silent for several seconds, as if the air itself was adjusting to his frequency. A woman in a blue knit hat whispered, "That is him. The one they kicked off the plane." The man beside her replied, "No. That is the one who made an entire airline kneel." Ethan paid no attention. He only wanted to breathe away from the suffocating room. But the moment he reached the seating area, his phone buzzed non-stop. A message from Marcus Hill, the CFO, appeared first. "Ethan, major news. Social media is exploding." He opened the notifications. CNN, The Washington Post, Reuters, NBC, AP News, all published within 20 minutes after the first video hit 500,000 views. Breaking Black CEO removed from flight airline grounded minutes later. Shocking North Sky's major shareholder was the man they kicked off. Justice in real time, his power move is reshaping an entire airline. Hundreds of thousands of comments flooded in like a rising river. Support, outrage, celebration, demands for reform. A new hashtag was going viral with unstoppable force, respect the seat. And of course, the biggest hashtag of the day, Ethan Caldwell. Ethan read the headlines and felt something strange. Not joy, not satisfaction, not pride. What he felt was heaviness, a painful truth that for the world to listen, he had to stand somewhere, most people would never be allowed to reach, a familiar figure approached. The Asian American woman from seat 2, D. She walked with a calm, respectful gravity. So she said softly, "I saw everything. I want to thank you. Not because you stood up for yourself, but because you stood up for all of us." Ethan nodded. "I only did what I had to do." She smiled sadly. "And that is exactly why it matters." The moment was interrupted by the sharp crackle of a radio behind them. A senior North Sky manager rushed over face-flushed voice, breathless. "Mr. Caldwell, we need to discuss preliminary disciplinary actions for the crew." Ethan did not turn immediately. He gave the man a few seconds to feel the silence, the kind of silence that forces people to confront themselves. Then he asked, low but sharp, "Where are they?" "We have them held in a private room," the manager replied, "waiting for your review." "No," Ethan said. "Bring them here." The manager stiffened. "H, you're here." In the middle of the concourse, Ethan met his eyes. When they made the mistake, they made it in front of everyone. Today they faced the consequences the same way. The manager paled, but did not dare argue. He rushed off. 3 minutes later, the crew appeared. Mark Dalton, the young flight attendant, face pale, as someone who had just watched his future crumble. Sandra Lowe, the lead attendant, trying to appear composed, though her trembling hands betrayed her. Captain Victor Hale still walking upright, but the fierce authority once burning in his eyes had turned to hollow ash. The entire terminal stilled. People lifted their phones. Some climbed on seats for a clearer view. Others fell silent, sensing they were about to witness something unforgettable. Ethan stood, not raising his voice, not using theatrics, yet his words carried through the entire hall. "Do any of you have something to say?" Mark spoke first, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I assumed. I did not check the boarding pass properly. I should not have treated you like that." His sentence broke apart midway. Sandra followed her eyes, glossy. "I take responsibility for the poor judgment. I am sorry. I deserve disciplinary action." The terminal stayed silent, hanging on to every word. Finally, Captain Hale stepped forward. People held their breath. This was the man who had told Ethan, "I am removing you for safety." But today his voice was ash. "I failed in my duty as captain. I did not act with fairness. I apologize for underestimating you." Ethan studied them for a long moment, his gaze cutting through every layer of defense they had left. Then he spoke slow but no longer cold. "I do not want apologies because of me. I want you to understand what your mistake has done to others for years. Today I had a voice, but the people before me, they did not." Mark's eyes welled. Sandra turned away. Hale closed his eyes. Ethan continued, "The consequences for you will be announced in the formal meeting. But what I want today is for you to remember this moment. Remember that a wrong decision does not just delay a flight. It delays the future of people who deserve respect." The terminal remained silent. Some nodded. Others wiped their eyes. For the first time in years, the crew felt the weight of the respect they had lost. At that moment, Donovan and the leadership team stepped forward. He announced the preliminary disciplinary actions right there in public. Mark Dalton suspended 60 days and required to complete advanced training. Sandra Lowe demoted and reassigned to a non-customer-facing department for 6 months. Captain Victor Hale suspended indefinitely pending independent investigation, with the possibility of permanent loss of flight privileges. A wave of murmurs rolled through the terminal. Some gasped, Some sighed. But one thing was clear, everyone felt they had just witnessed justice take shape in real time. Donovan turned to Ethan. "We have carried out your request." Ethan nodded. "Good. But this is only the beginning." And then, like a perfectly timed cue, the airport speakers came alive. North Sky Airlines announces the new flight to Denver will depart in 25 minutes. First-class passengers, please prepare for boarding. Everyone looked at Ethan. Donovan swallowed. "Mr. Caldwell, your seat 1A is ready." Ethan did not respond immediately. He gazed through the glass wall. The Seattle sky was covered in grey clouds, but far beyond them, a patch of light was beginning to open. He turned and walked toward the boarding counter. The new attendant bowed slightly, her voice shaky but sincere. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Caldwell." No one asked for his ID. No one rechecked his ticket. No one looked at him with suspicion. For the first time that day, Ethan felt something lighten inside him. As he passed through the boarding gate, a child waved and shouted loudly enough for the entire concourse to hear. "Thank you for standing up." Ethan paused for half a second. He did not turn back, but a small smile, rare and gentle as sunlight, piercing heavy clouds, touched the corner of his lips. He walked down the jetway straight to seat 1A, the seat that belonged to him, and this time no one dared claim it. But deep inside he understood. The seat was no longer just a seat. It had become a symbol of fairness, of courage, of a fight that should have begun long ago. Outside, a world was shifting, and inside the plane where Ethan sat down, buckled his belt, and prepared for a new journey, he knew this was only the beginning. Because this time, it was not just a flight taking off. It was an entire system beginning to correct its course. The new North Sky aircraft trembled softly as its wheels lifted from the runway, gliding into the silver-gray sky above Seattle. Thick clouds curled outside the window, like cold ribbons of smoke wrapping around the aircraft. But inside the first-class cabin, the air pulsed with a tense, heated silence. Ethan Caldwell sat in seat 1A, back straight, one hand resting lightly on the armrest, his eyes fixed on the blurred sky as if he were reading something hidden behind every layer of cloud. The cabin crew on this flight, a completely new team, and not the faces that had caused the earlier incident, moved with measured quietness. Afraid to disturb a passenger, they knew now held the power to alter the fate of their entire company. A young flight attendant approached and gently placed a glass of water on Ethan's table. She did not dare look directly at him, her voice low and filled with respect. "If you need anything, please do not hesitate to call me Mr. Caldwell." Ethan nodded slightly. He did not want special treatment. He only wanted respect, something every passenger should have had from the beginning. When the plane reached cruising altitude, the cabin light softened, but Ethan's posture did not. The sky outside seemed to mirror the waves inside him, not anger, not triumph, but the heavy calm of a man who had just placed his hand on a massive machine and felt it begin shifting in the direction he chose. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He opened it. A message from Marcus Hill. "The Orion board is in a second session. North Sky's CEO is being forced to explain everything. The morning report is making them furious." Ethan raised an eyebrow. Another message followed. "And one more thing. The entire country is waiting for you to speak. Media wants interviews. But I think let them wait." Ethan put the phone away and leaned his head back. He felt the hum of the engines, the faint hiss of air being cut by the wings, the heavy breaths of the man behind him, live streaming the first-class cabin as if witnessing a historical event. Several passengers recognized him, but none dared approach. They watched him with admiration, pride, and something rarer trust. Because this morning, they had seen someone flip the entire script in a sky they once believed belonged only to those with power. But Ethan knew this was only the beginning. At nearly 11,000 meters as the plane slipped through a thin cloud layer, Ethan closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, memories rolled back like old film. He remembered the day his mother, a thin night shift nurse, argued with an airline agent who tried to move her to the back of the plane, despite her having bought her seat in advance. Ethan had been 10 standing behind her, watching her struggle to explain in a tired but firm voice. In the end, she was dismissed, pushed out of line, no explanation. No one stood up for her. He had asked, "Why did they do that, Mum?" And she had answered sadly, "Because to them, sweetheart, some people do not deserve to sit up front." Ethan opened his eyes. The old pain in his chest returned, but this time it did not drag him down. It pushed him upward. He whispered, "No more." The soft glide of a seat wheel made Ethan turn. A man from seat 2C approached, brown-skinned, around 50, the air of a seasoned businessman. "Sorry to bother you," the man said quietly. "I am Steve Harmon. I saw everything that happened earlier. I just wanted to say." He paused. Ethan looked into his eyes and saw genuine respect. Not flattery, not politeness. "Thank you. I have lived through similar things in 25 years in this field. But I never dared do what you did," Ethan replied calmly. "I did what I could not do in time for my mother." Steve froze. His expression softened. "You changed more than you realize." Then he returned to his seat, leaving Ethan alone with those words that made the entire cabin feel strangely still. At this altitude, everything below looked small. Houses, cars, people like tiny sparks clinging to the earth. But in real life, those people carried entire worlds of emotion, hope, pain, and belief. And Ethan knew he had not stood up only for himself. He had stood up for every one of those sparks. His phone vibrated again. A message from Marcus. "Big news. A member of the Orion board is calling for Donovan's removal. He is being grilled hard. They want to know why the airline mistreated a major shareholder." Another message appeared. "Ethan, they want you as an advisor to the Orion board. Possibly more. Someone suggested you for the role of independent overseer for the entire aviation division." Ethan exhaled slowly. Not from shock. He had known this moment was coming. He thought for a few seconds, then typed back, "Not yet." "I am not finished here," Marcus replied almost instantly. "I figured. I will keep everything stable until you return." Ethan put his phone away, leaned back and looked toward the end of the cabin. A flight attendant there was quietly adjusting her uniform, but her hands trembled. She tried to hide it, not quickly enough. Ethan noticed, and he understood. Today, not only the guilty were shaken. Today, the good people were trembling too. Trembling from responsibility, from pressure, from the realization that this was an era where every action carried weight. Moments later, she approached, her voice as soft as cold air slipping past a window. "Mr. Caldwell, I am truly sorry for what happened to you earlier. I was not involved, but I want you to know not everyone here is like them." Ethan studied her for a few seconds, then said, "I know, and that is what matters." She bowed her head, eyes slightly red, then stepped away. Ethan watched her go, and for the first time that day, he felt a small spark inside him, a spark of hope, not just for himself, but for the entire industry he was about to help reshape. The speakers crackled as the pilot's voice came through softer than any cabin announcement Ethan had ever heard. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Williams. We are cruising at a stable altitude. Weather ahead looks good. And I would like to personally extend a greeting to Mr. Caldwell." A ripple of surprise moved through the cabin. "Thank you for reminding all of us of the responsibility of this profession, the responsibility to treat every passenger fairly. Sir, thank you." Ethan did not smile, but his eyes shimmered faintly. As the aircraft descended, the Denver sky shifted into a warm gold, as if the sun itself were offering a quiet blessing. And in that moment, Ethan understood. He was not just changing an airline. He was opening a new chapter for himself and for those who had never heard the voice of justice. When the wheels touched the runway, he felt his heart beat a deep, steady rhythm of resolve. The flight landed, but the fight had only begun. Denver welcomed Ethan Caldwell with a sky so clear it almost revealed the thin, trembling layers of air beneath the sunlight. Denver International Airport was always busy, but this afternoon, whether by coincidence or because of the news sweeping across the nation, every glance seemed to drift toward the man stepping out of the aircraft door. Ethan did not avoid a single look. He walked straight ahead, slow, but waited, as if every step pressed a silent message into the floor. Some passengers pointed, some nodded quietly, some lifted their phones to record. But no one dared approach. His aura was not the kind crafted to impress. It was the aura of impact, the kind possessed by people whose power requires no explanation. Marcus Hill waited in the VIP area. The moment he saw Ethan, his expression blended worry with exhilaration. "We have a problem," Marcus said immediately. "No greetings, no small talk." Ethan adjusted his collar and walked toward the glass wall where sunlight streamed in. "How big? Almost the entire Orion board is in full battle mode. They know everything. They want to meet you tonight." "Good," Ethan replied. "They need to understand this is not an incident. It is a symptom." Marcus nodded, then lowered his voice. "And the next wave team is waiting for us. They have been watching everything all day." Ethan already knew that. No tech company would ignore a national firestorm, especially when the man at the center of it was the same man negotiating to acquire them for $600 million. The black SUV carried them toward downtown Denver. Throughout the drive, Marcus's phone buzzed non-stop. News alerts, emails, interview requests, partnership offers. But the message that made him frown was one with a single subject line: "Priority press statement required before market opens tomorrow." Marcus held the phone toward Ethan. "They want a public statement. This is bigger than North Sky now. It is touching the national economy." Ethan put the phone down and looked out the window at the silhouette of the Rocky Mountains rising along the horizon. "We will handle it. But not now. The priority is Next Wave. The glass building where Next Wave's founders waited was tucked into a quiet corner of the Denver Tech Center. A place so pristine, it made one forget that decisions worth hundreds of millions were made every day inside those silent rooms. Ethan and Marcus entered the main conference room, wide and lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking distant mountains. Sunset poured in, flooding the room with warm orange light, creating the perfect stage for a meeting Ethan knew would be unlike any he had ever experienced. 3 founders stood waiting. Ryan Brooks, 42, CEO, energetic posture, but the cautious eyes of a man who had survived big deals. Nina Patel, 39, CTO, a coding prodigy known throughout cybersecurity, her gaze sharp as a blade slicing through data. Jared Wolf, 35. Chief Product Officer, quiet but infamous for his uncanny business intuition. The moment Ethan stepped in, the three founders stood straighter. Not out of courtesy, but because they knew the man entering the room was shaking an airline, a parent corporation, and possibly an entire country. Ryan shook Ethan's hand, first eyes filled with respect and a hint of intrigued awe. Mr. Caldwell, we have been following what happened today. Honestly extraordinary. Nina narrowed her eyes slightly. Not just extraordinary, it was a strategic strike. You moved an entire system with a single action and made it look effortless. Ethan responded calm and sharp. I was not trying to be powerful. I was trying to do what is right. Jared studied him like a complex algorithm. What is right, he said, but also something very few have the courage to do. Marcus noticed the energy in the room shift. Shall we sit? Everyone nodded. The meeting began. Ryan opened his laptop and presented Next Wave's flagship breakthrough, the Aegis 9 encryption architecture, capable of shielding government-level data against cyber attacks powerful enough to overwhelm modern AI. Marcus was focused. Nina explained. Jared added details. Everyone concentrated. Everyone except Ethan, who remained quiet. Not because he lacked interest, but because he was observing. The tone, the subtle reactions, the way these founders processed information. After a while, Ryan paused and looked at him. Mr. Caldwell, you haven't said a word. That makes me nervous. Ethan tilted his head. Nervous? Yes. Ryan gave a soft laugh. A man who can ground an airline when he is quiet, that is a dangerous sign. The room chuckled lightly, tension easing. Ethan placed his hands on the table and looked straight at the founders. Do you know why I chose Next Wave instead of the bigger corporation competing to buy you? Nina answered immediately. Because our product is stronger. No. Ethan lowered his voice as if sharing something only insiders deserve to hear. Because I see myself in you 15 years ago. Underestimated, judged, and still fighting. Ryan paused. Nina blinked. Jared drew a slow breath. Ethan continued. Talent is always greater than the impression people have of us. But if we do not stand up, they will never recognize it. Today I stood up for myself, but tomorrow I want to stand up with you. The room fell silent as stone. Marcus watched the moment and knew the deal was already sealed, but unexpectedly Jared spoke. Caldwell Cyber Systems is a giant. You hold enormous power. But after everything that happened today, are you sure you want to drag that storm into a major acquisition? Like this, Ethan looked straight at him, reading every unspoken concern. Jared, he said slowly, power does not frighten me. What frightens me is watching a broken system and staying silent. I do not want Next Wave to become a successful but timid company. I want you to be a company no one dares overlook. Nina swallowed. Ryan leaned back, exhaling deeply, the kind of exhale a person makes when committing to something life-changing. This deal, Ryan said, belongs to you. Marcus nodded hard. Good. We sign tomorrow afternoon. No Ethan cut in. We sign tonight. He glanced at his watch. And I need it done before 8. The Orion board is calling a session right after. Ryan laughed. Do you ever rest? Ethan answered with effortless sharpness. Opportunity does not wait for the tired. 3 hours later, the deal was signed. All $600 million secured in a single evening of intensity, strategy, and respect. When Ethan stepped out of the building, Denver had fallen into night. But the city was far from calm. LED screens on skyscrapers flashed breaking headlines. North Sky CEO under investigation after rejecting major shareholder. Leading tech company acquired by Ethan Caldwell. Congress demands inquiry into airline discrimination practices. Marcus stood beside him, staring at the headlines with a shiver. Not a shiver of fear. A shiver of knowing they were standing at the eye of a national storm. Ethan remained still, eyes fixed on the scrolling words. After a long moment, he spoke. "Marcus, do you hear that?" Marcus frowned. Hear what Ethan gave a rare, deep smile, as dark and powerful as the Denver night. The sound of change coming, and this time it is not arriving as a breeze. It is arriving as a storm. Night settled over Denver like a soft velvet curtain, but inside the 63-story headquarters of Orion Holdings, the air was tight enough to crack like glass. Dozens of office lights still burned across the upper floors where emergency meetings had been running without pause ever since the video of Ethan Caldwell being removed from a plane spread across the United States. Ethan walked into the main lobby at 7:48 in the evening. His dark suit blended into the shadows, but his eyes did not. They were sharp, bright, cutting through every layer of pretense. Senior staff rushed through the lobby talking rapidly, each wearing the expression of someone witnessing the greatest crisis of their careers. The moment they saw Ethan, they froze. Some stepped aside out of instinctive respect. Some nodded with a mix of submission and awe. Some tried to hide their fear, the fear of people who knew a massive reckoning was coming. Marcus Hill, who had arrived earlier, approached quickly. "Ready, always ready," Ethan replied, heading straight for the private elevator leading to floor 61, where the Orion board was holding an unprecedented emergency session. The meeting room doors opened. The space was wide, all glass walls overlooking the glowing Denver night, the city lights illuminating the tense faces around a massive black stone conference table. 12 board members turned toward Ethan. Their expressions varied: shock, respect, defensiveness, anger, and in a few pairs of eyes, fear. Richard Donovan, CEO of North Sky Airlines, stood at the head of the table. For the first time in his career, he was not standing tall. Not because he was tired, but because he knew everything had slipped out of his control. Mr. Caldwell Donovan said, trying to steady his voice, "Thank you for coming." Ethan did not sit. He placed both hands on the table and looked at each board member one by one. "You want to hear my story?" he said slowly. "Then here it is. Your airline, of which I am a major shareholder, treated me like someone untrustworthy, someone unworthy of the seat I paid for. And when I asked for the simplest thing, you removed me from the plane." A few members looked away. Some sat up straighter. "I am not here to complain. I am here to ask how many people before me were treated the same way and had no power to do anything about it." No one answered, only the silence of a truth cornered with no escape. An older board member, Charles Whitman, flipped through the document in front of him. "Mr. Caldwell, what you did today, grounding a commercial flight, has caused severe operational disruption. Our stock is dropping fast." The responsibility Ethan interrupted. "If you are afraid the stock is falling because the truth came out, then the problem is not me. The problem is a system too fragile to withstand transparency." Several members exchanged looks. Some tried to hide a smirk. A few darkened their expressions. Ethan continued, "I did not do what I did today out of anger. I did it because I knew that if I stayed silent, I would become just like the people who watched my mother be humiliated 40 years ago because she was a woman of color, daring to buy a seat in the front. No one could respond. Marcus placed a folder on the table. Before we go on, I invite you to review this report. On the large screen at the end of the room, charts appeared. Complaint rates of discriminatory incidents at North Sky rising sharply over the past 5 years. More than 47 similar cases never properly addressed. Major loopholes in first-class verification procedures. Anti-bias training reduced to meaningless formalities. Then came footage of Ethan being removed from the plane, captured from multiple passenger angles. The room thickened like mud. Some members flinched at Captain Hale's voice, telling Ethan sit somewhere else. Others winced at the arrogance on Franklin Rhodes's face as he occupied seat 1A. When the video ended, no one spoke for 20 seconds. Ethan looked at them, all these powerful people, and said, voice low but ringing like metal striking stone, "That is the true face of the system you are running." A board member, Linda Graves, finally asked, "Then what do you want, Mr.?" Caldwell Ethan stood straight and placed a folder on the table, one he had prepared long before stepping into the room. "I want change, and this is the plan." The board leaned in. Complete restructuring of North Sky Airlines, creation of a customer equity oversight board, reporting directly to the Orion board, mandatory anti-bias training for all flight and ground staff, new protocols for seat dispute resolution, leadership diversity targets within 18 months, comprehensive revision of first-class boarding procedures, and finally removal of Richard Donovan as CEO. The room erupted. Donovan shouted, "Caldwell, you do not have the authority. I hold 25%. Ethan said calmly, not moving. And the other 75% are watching that video and asking themselves if it were them in my place, would they have been treated the same? Linda Graves twirled her pen and looked at Donovan. Richard, you know that video is indefensible. Another member, Robert Klein, tapped the table. North Sky has lost $1.1 billion in 6 hours. How do you expect us to defend you? Donovan flushed crimson. I followed procedure, Ethan replied instantly. There is no procedure that tells you to remove a paying passenger because of their skin color. Donovan slammed his fist on the table. You are using this to grab more power. Ethan stared through Donovan as if looking through a thin layer of glass. I do not need more power. I already have enough. What I want is justice. The room fell into a deep silence, broken only by the faint sound of a live news broadcast, echoing from the hallway about Ethan Caldwell on CNN. Then another board member stood Evelyn Chen, known for being strict and nearly impossible to persuade. Mr. Caldwell, she said, in my personal opinion, you are not only correct, you are necessary. I will sign. Another stood. I sign. Then another, and another, and another. Marcus glanced at Ethan, eyes gleaming. They had crossed the threshold. Donovan slammed the table again. You are destroying an entire airline. Ethan turned to him one last time. No, we are saving it from the people who thought they could never be wrong. Finally, after 12 minutes of intense debate, all eyes turned to Charles Whitman, the decisive vote. He removed his glasses and sighed. Richard, he said you failed to control the company under your leadership. You allowed a customer to be publicly humiliated. You put the board at legal risk, and you refused to acknowledge your mistakes. Donovan went pale. Whitman signed the document. Mr. Caldwell, the motion passes. Donovan is removed, and we assign you a new role. Ethan raised a brow. What role? Whitman answered, Executive Director of Ethical Aviation Standards, the highest authority on fairness oversight in the entire Orion Group. Marcus nearly dropped his pen. The room went completely silent. Ethan took a slow breath. Then he said a sentence that sealed the moment in stone. "I will accept, but only if all of you agree that this is not my victory. It is an opportunity you cannot afford to waste." The board nodded. And in that instant, Ethan Caldwell officially became the most influential figure in the entire aviation sector of Orion Group, not because of power, but because of leadership rooted in integrity. When Ethan stepped out of Orion's tower, snow had begun to fall over Denver. Not much, just enough to make the ground shimmer beneath the streetlights. Marcus walked beside him, his voice low. "You just removed a CEO, restructured an airline, and closed a $600 million deal, all in 24 hours. Ethan, what kind of man are you?" Ethan smiled softly. "The kind of man who only does what is right." They walked on through the thin snowfall, but it was not the snow that made Denver cold. It was the storm of change forming in the air. A storm Ethan Caldwell had started, and one no one would be able to stop. Morning rose over Denver with a strange kind of brightness. It was not only the sun lifting itself over the horizon. It was the glow from thousands of phone screens, laptops, and televisions across the United States, all broadcasting the same headline: Ethan Caldwell appointed Director of Aviation Equity Oversight under Orion Group. No one knew exactly what happened behind the closed doors of last night's boardroom. But they knew one thing: never in the history of aviation had a passenger removed from a flight become the person rebuilding the system the very next day. News headlines flooded every platform: North Sky CEO removed from position. American aviation facing complete structural overhaul. Nation praises courage of black CEO. Power is not in words, it is in truth. From New York to Los Angeles, from Chicago to Atlanta, coffee shops were packed with people whispering, debating, replaying clips. Families watched the news over breakfast. Uber drivers listened through the radio. Students on subways watched the video of Ethan being removed from the plane and said softly, "For the first time, it feels like someone is speaking for us." And Ethan, he was standing in his hotel room, looking down at the vast city of Denver through the floor-to-ceiling window. He had just lived the longest night of his life. Not because he was tired, but because he understood he was no longer just a tech CEO. He had become a symbol. His phone vibrated endlessly. A message from Senator Collins: "I want to discuss a new anti-discrimination aviation bill." A message from the CEO of Microsoft: "We are ready to collaborate on AI fairness monitoring." A message from a mother in Texas: "My 10-year-old son said he wants to grow up to be like you." But the message that made Ethan pause the longest was one from someone who was no longer alive. It was an automated message from the old phone number he kept after his mother passed. The messages she once sent appeared as if she was speaking to him again. "Ethan, stand up whenever you know something is right." He placed a hand over his chest. His breath slowed. For a tiny moment, he felt as if she were standing behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder, the way she used to when he was a child. At 8 in the morning, Ethan and Marcus left the hotel and stepped into a black SUV. Their destination, the first national press conference since the incident. But Ethan did not know that across the country in Washington, D.C., something else was unfolding. At Congress, the chairman of the Transportation Committee was speaking. We are requiring Orion Group to formally address systemic discrimination in aviation. This will be the largest hearing in 20 years. Then he said something that made the entire nation jolt. We request Ethan Caldwell to participate as chief advisor. The chamber erupted. The country shook. The aviation industry trembled. When the car pulled into the Denver Press Center, hundreds of reporters were already gathered, camera flashes bursting like showers of white sparks. Crowds held up signs. "Thank you, Ethan. Respect the seat." Enough is enough. Ethan stepped onto the stage, a clean white space, with no LED screens, no theatrics, no loud music. Just a wooden podium, a single microphone, and the heavy silence of anticipation. He looked out at thousands waiting for him. A quiet breath. Then he spoke. "Yesterday I was not just removed from my seat. I was removed from a right. Every one of us deserves the right to be treated fairly." The room froze. "I have money. I have power. I am a CEO." Yet when I stepped on that plane, someone still believed I did not belong there. A woman in the front row began to cry. I did not speak up yesterday for revenge. I spoke up because for decades, far too many people have been treated the same way, and no one listened. Ethan rested a hand on the podium. Today I stand here not because I am strong. I stand here because I want a system that is not allowed to be weak. The room erupted into thunderous applause. Ethan raised a hand, asking for silence. I am not a hero. I am simply the last person who said, "Enough." But in return, I was met with the support of millions. That proves something important. Today is not the day I stood up. It is the day we all stood up. A reporter stood. "Mr. Caldwell, do you believe you have changed an entire industry?" Ethan looked directly into the camera, into the millions watching live. "I did not change aviation. I only held a mirror up so they could see themselves. What they choose to do now is up to them." After the conference, Ethan walked out into the Denver sunlight. The sky was clear like crystal. A soft wind moved through the air. The last bits of snow melted into glittering drops at his feet. Marcus walked beside him. "Ethan, you just did something almost no one has the courage to do." Ethan smiled gently, deep and quiet. "I only did what I wish someone had done for my mother 40 years ago." Marcus stayed silent. Nothing else needed to be said. That evening, Ethan boarded a North Sky flight back to Seattle, sitting once again in seat 1A. But this time, no one stared at him with suspicion. No one checked his ID. No one questioned his place. The new lead flight attendant approached and bowed slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. From this day on, every passenger will be treated more fairly because of you." Ethan answered softly. "Not because of me, because of all of us." As the plane lifted off the runway, city lights shrinking below the window, Ethan leaned back and closed his eyes. Today he did not just reclaim his seat. He opened a path, and millions were stepping onto it. The sky outside was vast and endless, but never before had it felt like it truly belonged to everyone until now. From the perspective of an expert in organizational behavior and power dynamics within service environments, the journey of Ethan Caldwell reveals a core truth. Society often avoids. Injustice does not begin with grand actions. It begins with small deviations that are tolerated and repeated until they harden into norms. Yet for that very reason, when a single person is courageous enough to stand up at the right moment, an entire structure that once appeared unshakable can be forced to confront itself. Ethan did not use his power to retaliate. He used it to ask a far greater question. Does this system deserve the people it claims to serve? And the answer, as we have seen, can only come through real transformation. If this story stirred something within you, please like the video so the message of fairness can spread further, and do not forget to subscribe to follow more journeys where a single action can spark a sweeping reform. And before you go, leave a comment with the phrase "Stand Up" to remind each other that every major change begins with someone who refuses to stay silent.